I'm Dr. Jamie Howard from the Child Mind Institute, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. We're right in the middle of Mental Health Awareness Month and Speak Up for Kids campaign is going on. There's a lot for us to dive into today, but I want to first give you an introduction to the fabulous women who will be speaking with us. And I also want to give you a little information about who I am. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at Child Mind Institute here in New York. And I specialize in treating kids and teens who have anxiety disorders and who've been exposed to trauma and who also experience depression. And so the treatments we use are really effective, and we do things like encourage kids to systematically and bravely face their fears. And this is a lot easier said than done, but we have two very brave teams today who are going to tell you a little bit about their experience with mental health and treatment. We also have two other women who will be speaking with us. So we have Meredith Walker, co-founder of Smart Girls and an amazing producer who helped put this together today. Shaylah Evans, a hilarious actress and comedian who is currently appearing on MTV's Girl Code and also performing at the New York City Upright Citizens Brigade Theater. And then, as I mentioned, we have two very brave teenagers with us, Franny and Natasha. And they're both going to speak to us about their experiences facing their fears and receiving treatment. So it's so great to be here tonight because there is a problem with stigma in our country. We don't treat mental health disorders with the same dedicated sort of pursuing of treatment as we do with other disorders. So 15 million kids in America have psychiatric or learning disorders, and only half of them receive treatment, and that's partially because of the stigma. So we want to speak up because you're not alone. Everyone is affected by mental health in one way or another, if it's a parent, a sibling, a friend, and silence gets us nowhere. It's really important that we speak up and we do our part to promote accurate information about mental health care and get kids the treatment they need. So I want to start with Meredith. So maybe you could tell us, Meredith, a little bit about why this campaign is so important to Smart Girls and maybe how you think we can use social media to change perceptions about mental health.
Well, we think this is such an important thing because, first of all, just taking away any stigma is always a good thing. And just from knowing all the studies that are out there and everything that you read, knowing how many people are affected by any type of mental illness. And, you know, you need to know that you're not the only one. You need to know that you're heard and you're understood. And that's one of the things we really like to do at Smart Girls is make sure that you see yourself or you hear your story or you get to tell your story and know that you're not alone, that we all have a lot more in common than we have differences. And we all have perceptions of things, but when you connect people together through social media, that's when you might stumble upon a different version of a story you thought you'd already heard. Or it might open up your eyes, you know, and humanize another story. Rather than it just seeming like some kind of far-off news story, it's a little bit more in-depth at times, that social media connection can be. And it's a way of collecting voices for a bigger cause, if you want. And to be able to have a hashtag that you can click on and then hear, you know, as you read, what everyone else has to say about it and see other perspectives, it's very powerful. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you know, I know that there are some big personalities, some very mean, bully media personalities right now who are making fun of social media activism and the use of hashtags. And you can see it that way if you want, or you can see it as a way to bring people together and see the power of good of the internet. And it's a shareable collection of voices. And there's nothing more beautiful than that when a bunch of people, especially when a lot of girls, gather their voices and join forces that way. So social media really can make a difference in not feeling alone and in giving power to a message so the people are paying attention and care about something.
That's so important, and I think that we want to hear from some of the girls who had experiences where maybe they didn't feel as comfortable at first talking about receiving treatment, and now because of forces like this, they're feeling a little bit more comfortable. So, Natasha, I've read some of your blogs on HuffPost, and it sounds like you've actually had quite a bit of anxiety that you've experienced, as well as a traumatic experience, and yet you talk about it so beautifully, and you show how you can be resilient even in the face of these adverse circumstances. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what it was like for you having anxiety and seeking treatment.
Yeah. Well, in fourth grade, this kid at my old school killed himself in front of us, and so I mean, he didn't. I don't think it was intentional, but it just kind of happened, and I developed PTSD, and it never really went away, but we thought it went away, and then my parents sent me to therapy to talk about it, and then I told my friend that I was going to a therapist, and she's super mean about it, and I was like, okay, well, I'm crazy, and I was super embarrassed about it, and then we kind of stopped going, but then it got worse, and then I think we went to 2 more therapists or doctors, and then I got diagnosed with anxiety, and then school sucked and everything, and then I switched schools, and it got a little better, and everyone's more comfortable, and so I'm able to talk about it more.
What would you say to that girl now? I think she probably didn't mean to necessarily hurt your feelings, so I'm not saying, she's a bad friend necessarily, but she sounds like she was uninformed. What might you say to her, Natasha, now knowing what you know?
I mean, she ended up being a really bad friend, but I just think it's not, I mean, it sounds super cheesy, but it's not a bad thing, and you just need a little bit of help, and I think everybody needs a little bit of help.
I agree. I think everyone needs a little help too, and that seems like a really important message. And Meredith agrees. Franny, so I had the pleasure of watching you give a talk to a huge audience at our gala a couple of years ago, and that would have made anyone, including me, incredibly nervous. And you handled it so bravely. So clearly treatment worked for you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your experience was like having anxiety and seeking treatment for it.
So basically, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression a few years back after a really rough school transition that had sort of really knocked me, it had made me very unstable. And so my family and I went through a pretty rough time trying to find the right treatment. I was taken out of school for a while. There were a couple other switches. And then I found CMI, and I started working and started going through treatment. I was very lucky with my friends in terms of the fact that they were all as understanding as they could be towards my situation. But yeah, I worked very hard, and there were definitely some rough months. But yeah, after a year and a half, or a little under a year and a half, I guess, I was able to speak that gala for a big audience, which was a huge step. It was scary, but it was something that I was able to handle, which is amazing.
Because in the beginning, when you had anxiety, you were avoiding things that caused you anxiety. Is that right?
Yeah, I think a big part of having anxiety is coping with anxiety is to have to change your thinking from using avoidance as a crutch to realizing that you're using it. And sort of systematically going through the things that you're avoiding, that you're afraid of, and sort of conquering them until you can go about your daily life and even do things that wouldn't be part of your daily life, like speaking at a gala, and being able to face them without so much irrational fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what you went through is called exposure therapy, right? Where you systematically face those things that were so scary. And so I guess I'm curious, from your perspective, Franny, what are the consequences of doing nothing, of not getting the treatment that kids need?
Well, I think I sort of got to feel some of those consequences for a little while because of how difficult it was to find treatment. And I can say from a first-hand experience, anxiety is not something that gets better without being paid attention to. I know that as I let things go, I mean, it doesn't, or for me, it didn't come in one fell swoop. It wasn't like I woke up one day and was anxious. It came little by little, and it grew. With everything that I avoided, I became scared of another thing. And by not treating it for a while, I think I suffered. I ended up having to do more when the time finally did come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point, that ignoring it doesn't make it go away. In fact, it can make it grow bigger. And what we really want to do is get kids treatment, because then we have an opportunity not only to treat it and get them back on the path to living a really happy, healthy life, but also to prevent more serious mental health problems in the future. So thanks for sharing that with us. And I guess one thing that you mentioned was that you had pretty supportive friends, and Natasha, unfortunately, did not. And so that makes me think, Natasha, that maybe the Speak Up for Kids campaign might be particularly meaningful to you. So what do you think is the importance of speaking up, or why is it important to speak up?
I mean, it's not really a good thing to have something that's a really big part of you and like it affects you, and have people not, like people that are close to you, not know about it, or just people in general, because I don't think it should be something you're hiding. Like when you have a cold or like something, you're not hiding it. And I just think it shouldn't be something that people are trying to not talk about.
Yeah, what a good point. If we had a cold, we wouldn't just sit and suffer in silence and no one would blame us for it. We would tell people, and they would help us get treated for the cold. So that makes tons of sense to me. So, Shaylah, I see that you joined us. So
yeah.
I think that you also can relate to some of the anxiety that Franny and Natasha are talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. I started having problems with panic attacks when I was pretty young. It really started with like very centered around doctor's office visits, and I over the years got worse and worse, and it kind of spread into all elements of my life after a long time. It's hard because there's not a lot of sympathy for panic attacks. People tell you you're being a baby, or that you should just get over it, and it makes it feel like you're doing something wrong, which makes it even harder to be willing to talk to people about it, because you're like, oh, I did something wrong. This is something to be ashamed of, because of the kind of language people use when you have a panic attack.
So that makes perfect sense. Not only are you kind of suffering with what you're dealing with, but then you're also getting like doubly distressed by having to deal with people's negative reactions toward you, and that feels really scary and unfair.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it seems like you have been able to maybe use humor as one way of dealing with your anxiety and your panic specifically. Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I actually sort of forced myself to start doing improv comedy as a just as a, hey, I should be brave kind of thing. And I actually, through doing that, learned that that it's way harder to do an improvised comedy show than it is to like just go out and be in the world and do the things you need to do. And it actually helped me relax a lot in my actual life, to know that like, oh, but I have like all these friends who have my back when I'm on stage, and we all support each other, and our ideas are good enough there. So in day-to-day life, it's not as big, it's so much less stressful because you're not waiting for, you know, applause or laughter. So I actually think it's a really cool outlet to remind yourself that you can't control everything and it's okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and it's really consistent actually with how we treat anxiety. So we really encourage people to get ahead of their anxiety, to sort of do something that makes you scared until it doesn't scare you anymore. And I imagine you feel less scared when you go out to perform now than you used to, because you're used to it and so you've kind of mastered it.
And I think comedy is a cool place for anyone with anxiety or depression or any kind of history of emotional issues or anything, because comedians are all kind of depressed and full of anxiety, and it's just a bunch of people getting together to find what's fun about the world around them and not dwell on sadness, and I think it's a cool community to be part of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Natasha and Franny, I'm curious what you think. Have you ever found that like humor or comedy or anything like that has been helpful to you in coping with your anxiety or anything that you've been struggling with?
I go to performing arts high school, and I mean, because I really like music, and so I think at least for me, like listening to music or writing music or playing music helps a lot.
So similar, to sort of perform and to do something that you really enjoy.
Yeah.
I know personally that humor, I guess, I don't do it for a living, or I don't do it often, but I guess using it to lighten a situation, especially when explaining it to people. I know that I've used that before, just because it makes it more approachable for a topic that a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about.
And Meredith, I know we haven't heard from you in a while, but I'm curious if you had anything that you wanted to add based on what I've been
I just totally agree about people not understanding, you know, it's just not talked about enough, so people aren't sure what they're dealing with. And I know, you know how just in the vernacular people will say, like, I was having a heart attack when One Direction came in the room. Topical. Or maybe not. But people do the same thing with panic attack. They're like, I'm going to have a panic attack, you know, and I think that dilutes what really happens. I mean, physiologically, you feel like you're going to die. I mean, you really do feel like your life might be ending and you're not breathing, and you lose kind of your sense of grounding in the world. And the way it feels is not something light or that you can get over or just shake off. I mean, it's a major experience. And I've definitely had my share of anxiety. And I hear a lot, like in the moment, you should breathe deep, you know, like kind of get your nervous system to catch up with yourself a little bit, and that's what to do. But is there anything else that you can say? Because even though I'm treated and still dealing with it, there are moments where I can feel anxiety and worry. The wave of it kind of is taking over reality and logic. And what can we do in that moment to kind of get our grounding back?
So I can give you some ideas about what we would do in treatment, and then I'd love to actually hear if Natasha and Franny have ideas too about their sort of go-to coping strategies. But when people have panic disorder, the treatment we use is called interoceptive exposure, which basically means just like you have to practice bravely facing things that make you scared. Like if you're afraid of public speaking, we would have you start small and then build up to say, being in a Google Hangouts or giving a talk at the gala. With panic disorder, we actually expose people to those feelings that they have in their bodies because they need to learn that they're not going crazy and not dying. And so what happens is they get used to them. It's a process called habituation, and then it no longer causes distress. And you kind of undo that association. You know that when it's coming, you let it wash over you, you're not dying, you're not going crazy, and eventually it passes and you're okay. And one of the things that does help in that process too is doing some deep breathing, very specific diaphragmatic breathing, because it does sort of reduce that false alarm that's going off. Because that's what we call it. Panic disorder is like the ultimate false alarm. Your body's acting as if it's being chased by a vicious bear when really it's not. So that would be one of the things we do for treatment, is to go through that process of exposure. And we would teach people deep breathing, and we would teach them grounding and reminding yourself where you are in the moment. But I'm curious, Natasha and Franny, what do you think? How would you answer that? You're kind of experts too at this point.
Okay. Well, I don't really get panic attacks as much as I just get like super anxious.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what I was told to do when I'm super anxious is just like do the opposite of what you want to do, which sort of doesn't make sense. But like if I get really anxious and like I don't want to go to school, I mean go to school, like, because you're getting really anxious about something that, I mean, like, I get really anxious about everyday things that aren't a big deal, like going to school. Once you're in school, you're like, okay, it's like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel so bad, but when you're in the moment, it feels really bad and really scary. But like if you just like go and don't think about what's happening and just like go, and then it goes away.
Awesome. That makes perfect sense to me. So it sounds like one of your go-to strategies is what we call opposite action. So kind of doing the opposite of what that anxiety is telling you to do. And what about you, Franny?
Well, I do have panic attacks, and luckily they're fairly infrequent. But when I had them much more often, something that I learned to do or was taught to do was to identify the specific bad thought that I was having, because usually it wouldn't happen that I would just have a panic attack and there wouldn't be a cause. That doesn't make sense. So try and identify the cause, and then try and identify the thought that was making that cause. Because sometimes when you're very anxious, you can take things that seem scary, like school, or the idea of going to school, and then blow them up and make them seem big enough that they put you in a state of panic. So what I would do is identify the thought, and then try and identify how it's bigger than it should be. And then to sort of do what Natasha does, and face it if you can, and if you can't, try and get your mind off of it. Like I would, try and read sometimes, or I would go and talk to a family member, just to try and get myself out of that mode. And I know it sounds really easy saying it, but that it can be really difficult. But that's just what I would suggest.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually sound easy. It sounds like it takes a lot of effort. So you really focused on finding the thought behind your anxiety, and it sounds like challenging it to see if it's realistic, because you mentioned something about like maybe it's bigger than it actually should be. And then if you can't face it in that moment, you use distraction. So it sounds like you have a good toolbox. And Shaylah, I'm curious, because you too had panic. So how do you tend to cope, or did you find strategies over the course of your life?
I think a lot of it has to do with like my coping mechanisms. I'm very impressed by the way that you guys are so ready to make yourselves do the things that frighten you, because that's a really huge, hard thing to do. But I know a lot of times the way I've learned to deal with my anxiety is to really try and identify if there's something deeper, like a feeling deeper beyond it that is bothering me. Because sometimes I'll have a panic attack about being like, oh, I don't want to, I have to go do something that I don't want to do. And what helps me is to stop and say, okay, but if I'm doing, what brought me to this situation? Like, why am I here? Oh, maybe because I agreed to do something I didn't want to do. Why did I do that? Oh, because I didn't want to let someone down. Why didn't I? So, like, going, sort of digging backwards and figuring out what my real feeling is. Like, am I feeling angry? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling frustrated? Like, as opposed to thinking it is just anxiety, to take the power away from it and be like, no, I'm feeling a specific emotion that is creating anxiety, but that I still have an emotion and that my feelings are valid, and that just going through that whole process calms me down. Also, trying to go through all that takes your mind off of what you're thinking about, and then by the time you're like, oh, I guess I'm feeling angry, you're like, oh, and I haven't worried about that thing for 10 minutes. I'm calm again. So that always helps me to just reason through and try and figure out what my real needs are and what's really going on.
That makes a lot of sense, reasoning through and being really specific about what emotions you're experiencing, because there's even some new research that shows that just accurately labeling your emotion can start to decrease the intensity of your emotions. So it's always nice when people kind of stumble upon stuff that researchers tell them a decade later. So we want to sort of move into 10 minutes or so of Q&A, and there's some questions that have come in, so I'll read them aloud to people, and then I can give my 2 cents, and if other people have ideas too, I would love for you all to share your thoughts as well. So one question is, how can you tell the difference between regular anxiety and when you should seek help? So I would say, in general, we all experience anxiety. That's a normal human emotion. I know I experience it. One of the differences between just the experience of temporary anxiety and an anxiety disorder is that there's something called functional impairment with an anxiety disorder. And that means that your job as being a kid or a teenager is impaired in some way. So for teenagers, your jobs are to go to school, do the best you can, and to make friends and learn how to keep them and have healthy friendships, to be in a family where you feel loved and you give love, and to start to figure out your identity. How are you different from other people, and what types of people are like you? So those are kind of the tasks of being a teen. And if your anxiety is getting in the way of those tasks, then you want to seek treatment. So for example, Natasha, you mentioned that there was this urge to skip school, and your anxiety was telling you to do that. So that would be a good example of when it becomes more of a disorder rather than a temporary anxious feeling. I'm curious if any of you, Franny, Natasha, Meredith, Leah, if any of you have ideas too about how you can sort of tell the difference.
I would say for me, it's when I have felt in my life that is it called anhedonia, I think? It's when you really can't find pleasure in the things that you really enjoy doing, and when that lasts longer than you feel comfortable calling it like a funk. You know it's been going on and you just haven't felt like you've been really living. That's when I feel like the anxiety has taken over and I'm not really seeing life realistically. And for me, I think that would be a good measure. I hope that's not misleading.
No, so loss of interest in things that you used to enjoy is a signal that something's not right. And if it persists for at least 2 weeks or more, then we want to seek treatment. Franny, what about you? Do you have any ideas about what might differentiate like normal, typical anxiety from atypical anxiety?
I guess what you said, when it starts keeping you from doing very regular things, or it keeps you from getting your job done, I think that's when you want to seek help. And I mean, if you can tell, maybe even before that, so when you start, like what Meredith said, you start not being interested in your job or things like that, and maybe seeing if that's, or, you know, thinking yourself and digging a little and seeing whether that's due to anxiety or due to another cause, and then sort of finding it then. But I guess, yeah, you seek treatment when you when it's so bad that you know need to.
Mm-hmm. So another question that we have here is, how do you deal with people who don't get the magnitude of your disorder? So people kind of downplay it or don't really appreciate the distress you're in. That can be really challenging. I think one of the things that we want to do is to pick your close friends, start with people closest to you, and you know, pick a quiet time to explain to them what it's like in your day-to-day life. And empathy, you know, doesn't necessarily happen overnight. So these might be repeated conversations, and it might be that you have to really educate people about your disorder or about your experience, and some willingness to do that can go a long way. I guess Franny and Natasha, maybe Natasha, what do you think? Because you kind of dealt with this with your friend who, well, I don't know what she did, but she did something that made you feel really bad when you told her that you were seeking treatment. Maybe she suggested that it was, you didn't need it or something. What would you say? Like, how do you get people to appreciate when there's like a real problem?
I mean, I tell my friends now, and they're all pretty accepting about it. And they all like understand that it's not just like, oh, I'm anxious, like for a second. But it's hard, I think, to get people to understand. And if they're like truly like, I think your friends, they'll try to understand. So I think, I mean, it's hard to tell people and to have them react how you want them to react. But I mean, if they're your friends, it'll end up fine.
Yeah. So a good friend will make some effort to see things from your perspective. That makes sense. So I think I have another question here as well. How can you tell the difference between a panic attack and an anxiety attack? I think, so a panic attack is a kind of a specific term we use, and an anxiety attack is something that got adopted in culture somehow. But really, a panic attack is a discrete period of time in which your body, you have physiological symptoms like your heart is beating really fast, it's difficult to breathe, you're experiencing nausea, trembling, lots of physical symptoms, and at the same time you sort of think you're going crazy or you're dying. So it's a largely physical experience to have a panic attack. An anxiety attack is, I think it's sort of something we say in our culture when we're feeling overwhelmed with a lot of demands or a lot of anxiety. That would be my explanation. But, you know, Shaylah or anyone else who has ideas about that, feel free to let me know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's hard because it is such a cultural thing, as you mentioned before, to be like, oh my gosh, it's like the world is ending, like, oh my God, I die, or like people say that just as a description of how they're feeling if something just bothers them for 2 seconds, and it is hard to differentiate. But I really think, I don't know, because I get general anxiety as well as very specific panic attacks, and it's such a physiological difference. Like, it's anxiety just in general never has that same physical effect as a panic attack. Like, I don't know, it's really, I can tell the difference in my body, and it is hard to explain. I had someone that I was very close with had what they felt was a like full-on panic attack recently, and it was someone I'd known from when I was younger, and they called me and told me, and were like, I'm really sorry that that's how you feel when you're upset. Like I'd never felt that before, and now that I know that's what you meant, I feel very sorry that people don't always take it more seriously, because it is a very different feeling. But it's hard to explain to other people too, so it's tricky.
Mm-hmm. I think you described it really well. I think that difference in your body kind of is a really good distinction. With generalized anxiety, if there's more sort of worries and lower grade sort of physical sensation, whereas with panic, it's really a full-blown fight or flight response taking over in your body. I just noticed another question, which is, do I think that girls are faced with different anxieties than boys are? And, there are different rates. Girls do in general tend to have higher rates of anxiety disorders than boys do, or at least some subtypes of anxiety disorders, like post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. Girls definitely have higher rates of that. But is that because girls face different stressors than boys? That's an interesting question. I have some thoughts. I'm also curious, Meredith, maybe do you have thoughts about that?
I was unmuting, sorry.
No.
I definitely don't want to leave out anything that's going on for boys or young men, but I know that from what I've read and experienced and what I see is that we're going through so much anyway, and the relational aggression that girls do to each other, which is like where boys might hit each other and get in a playground fight, girls use words and freezing people out and things like that, as that's more their default kind of mode. And that causes so much anxiety, because instead of just feeling physical pain and getting over it, you feel like you're totally abandoned and don't have any friends anymore, and why should I wake up tomorrow and go to school? It's going to be so awful. And so I feel like the seeds are planted then for some really, a lot of anxiety-inducing situations. So I do feel like it does lean a little heavier on the girl side from my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I said, some of the data will back you up that girls have more anxiety disorders than boys, and this sounds like one potential reason for that in the teenage years, because girls have maybe more of a tendency toward relational bullying rather than physical bullying, and especially we're seeing it a lot with social media, actually. You can very quickly disseminate a negative message about someone, and that can feel really bad. I don't know if Franny, have you had any experience, or have you observed that maybe girls have different experiences of anxiety than boys?
I think you definitely observe it. I think it makes a lot of sense that girls would face different anxieties than boys, just because of the different ways that girls are portrayed in the media, and the different ways that girls are sort of indirectly taught to think of themselves as they grow up. How there are different pressures for each gender. I think that all leads to having different types of anxiety, and I think we were talking about how the internet can be a really great tool for good, and by using Twitter handles and things like that, you can click in and find you can find great causes and lots of people who support them, but it's also a facilitator for horrible interactions between people, because when you mentioned bullying, bullies can feel a lot stronger when they're behind keyboards, and for both boys and girls, I think, but especially for girls, who have to deal with objectification and things like that. That sort of bullying with words is especially powerful, and I think that probably does cause a lot of anxiety, which I am lucky to have not personally experienced, but would definitely understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've been able to observe that, if not experience it. And so I think you brought up a really good point. I'm just I'm mindful of the time, but what you said was that social media can be used for something really good too. So bullying and bullying via social media is getting a lot of press right now, but look at what we're able to do via social media. So not only can you disseminate negative messages, but you can also promote really positive causes as well. So what I'd love to do is direct people to our website, childmind.org, and also just to visit us online at #ISpeakUp so that other people can join in speaking up for kids and for teens' mental health. It's so important that we have conversations like this where we see that really kind, well-adjusted people like Natasha and Franny and I almost got your name wrong, Shaylah, can have these struggles and overcome them so beautifully. So I really appreciate you all joining in and being so brave, and we really appreciate Smart Girls for partnering with us in getting out this really important message. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you for hosting.